The soft hum of my laptop filled the air as I finalized the last details of a major marketing project. Sunlight streamed through the large window of my home office, casting a warm glow on the stacks of papers that lay scattered across my desk. I absentmindedly glanced at the framed wedding photo of Mark and me, a snapshot of a moment that felt like a lifetime ago. Our smiles were radiant, untainted by the complexities that had crept into our lives over the years. I leaned back in my chair and sighed, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and unease settle in my chest. "Hey, Sarah, you in here?" Mark's voice broke the silence, pulling me from my thoughts. He entered the room with his usual exuberance, his face lighting up like a child on Christmas morning. "Yeah, just wrapping things up for work," I replied, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. "How was your day?" "Can't complain, but I have some exciting news." He leaned against the doorframe, a grin spreading across his face. "Jake's coming to stay with us for the summer." The mention of my teenage nephew made my stomach flutter, a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Jake?" I echoed, trying to mask my unease. "Isn't that a bit sudden?" "I know it's last minute," Mark continued, oblivious to my hesitations, "but with everything going on with his parents, I thought it would be good for him to spend some time with us. Remember how much fun we had when he was younger?" I nodded, recalling the laughter-filled afternoons spent playing video games and sharing popcorn on movie nights. Yet, as those memories danced in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. Jake was no longer the innocent boy I remembered. He was now a rebellious 17-year-old, caught in the throes of teenage angst. "Yeah, I remember," I said slowly, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "It'll be nice to have him around, I guess." Mark's enthusiasm was palpable as he continued to talk about the plans he had for Jake's stay. "We can take him to the beach, go hiking, maybe even have a barbecue this weekend. It'll be great to bond again, don't you think?" "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. "It sounds fun." The moment hung in the air, filled with an unspoken tension as I returned my gaze to the photo on my desk. Mark's words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this summer would be different. The doorbell rang suddenly, jolting me from my thoughts. "Must be him," Mark exclaimed, rushing toward the door. My heart raced as I followed him into the living room, the anticipation of Jake's arrival heavy in the air. When Mark swung open the door, there stood Jake, a tall, striking young man with tousled hair and a confident grin. He looked every bit the part of a rebellious teenager, but there was something endearing about him too. "Hey, Uncle Mark, Aunt Sarah," he called out, his voice booming with a mix of excitement and bravado. "Jake!" Mark enveloped him in a warm embrace, lifting him off the ground before setting him down. I stepped forward, welcoming him with a hug that felt both familiar and strange. "Wow, you've grown," I said, pulling back to look at him. "It's been a while." "Yeah, well, you know how it is." He shrugged, a hint of defiance in his eyes. "Life's been interesting." I felt a pang of sympathy for him, knowing the turmoil he had faced with his parents' divorce. "I'm glad you're here," I said softly, hoping to convey my support. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah," he replied, a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. It disappeared almost instantly as he glanced around the house. "This place hasn't changed much." Mark beamed, clearly thrilled to have him back. "Let's get you settled in. We've got a lot of fun planned for the summer." As Jake followed Mark into the living room, I lingered for a moment, observing the dynamic that was beginning to unfold. I couldn't shake the feeling that this summer would challenge everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and even my own desires. As I watched them laugh and joke together, I felt an unfamiliar stirring within me, a sense of excitement mixed with an underlying tension that I couldn't quite place. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the breakfast table. I sipped my coffee, trying to shake off the strange feelings that had begun to swirl in my mind since Jake's arrival. It had only been a few days, yet I found myself drawn to him in a way that felt both exhilarating and wrong. I glanced at Jake, who was absorbed in his phone, laughing at whatever he was watching. It struck me that he was still just a kid, Yet there was an intensity about him that was hard to ignore. "Hey, Jake," I called, trying to sound casual. "How's the studying going?" He looked up, a grin spreading across his face. "Not bad. I could use a break, though. Want to help me with some math later?" "Sure," I replied, my heart racing at the thought of spending more time together. "I'll be in my office after breakfast." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of mundane chores, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake off the thrill I felt at the prospect of helping Jake. There was something refreshing about his youthful spirit, a stark contrast to the routine of my life with Mark. I pushed the thought away, reminding myself of the boundaries I needed to maintain. Later that afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing a marketing strategy, Jake knocked on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked, peeking his head in. "Of course. Come in," I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. He plopped down on the chair across from me and flashed that charming smile that seemed to light up the room. "I was thinking about what we should work on," he said, leaning forward. "I really want to get better at this stuff before school starts again." "Let's tackle that algebra homework," I suggested, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As we worked together, I found myself admiring his intelligence and determination. Every time he laughed at my attempts to explain concepts, it felt like a spark igniting between us. I could see the shift in the air, an electric tension that was impossible to ignore. "Thanks for helping me, Sarah. I really appreciate it," Jake said, his voice low. I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "You make it easier to understand." "Just doing my job," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, but my heart was racing. That night, we decided to watch a movie together in the living room. Mark was working late, and it was just the two of us. I chose a light-hearted romantic comedy, hoping it would keep the mood relaxed. As we settled on the couch, Jake reached for the blanket, pulling it around us both. The warmth enveloped us, and I could feel the closeness, the air thickening with unspoken words. As the movie played, I tried to focus on the screen, but my attention kept drifting to Jake. He leaned in closer, his shoulder brushing against mine, and I felt a thrill shoot through me. "This movie is terrible," he whispered, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I couldn't help but laugh, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maybe we should change it," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nah, I like it. It's more fun to watch it with you," he said, his gaze lingering on me. There was an intensity in his eyes that made my breath hitch. Just then, he shifted slightly, our faces inches apart. The world around us faded. It was just him and me, cocooned in that moment. I could feel the heat radiating from him, and an undeniable urge bubbled up inside me. "Jake," I started, feeling the weight of the moment. "We shouldn't." But before I could finish, he leaned in closer, his lips almost brushing against mine. My heart raced, and I felt a strange thrill along with a rush of guilt. "I know this is complicated," he murmured, "but I can't help how I feel." I pulled back, shaking my head. "This isn't right. You're my nephew, and I'm married. We can't do this." He looked hurt, a mixture of confusion and desire etched on his face. "I get it, but it doesn't change how I feel. Can't we just enjoy the moment?" As I stared into his eyes, the internal battle raged within me. My mind screamed for me to step back, to uphold the boundaries I had always lived by. But my heart thudded in my chest, craving the connection that was suddenly so palpable. "Jake, we need to stop this," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "We need to think about what this could mean." He sighed, leaning back on the couch, disappointment shadowing his features. "Yeah, I know. It's just hard." We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging heavily between us. I couldn't shake the sense of exhilaration, the rush of emotions that had spiraled out of control. This summer was supposed to be about healing, about family. Instead, it felt as though I was standing on the precipice of something I had never imagined, and I was terrified of what might happen next. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park as Mark led us toward the picnic area. Jake walked beside me, his youthful energy radiating in the air around us. I could hear Mark animatedly recounting stories from his childhood, but my attention was elsewhere. I was acutely aware of Jake's presence, the subtle way he leaned in when he spoke, the warmth of his laughter, and the way his eyes sparkled with mischief and dreams. "Do you remember the summer we took him to the lake?" Mark asked, breaking through my reverie. He was terrified of the water, but by the end he was jumping off the dock like a cannonball. "Yeah, and I nearly drowned trying to save his overzealous attempts," I chuckled. But deep down, a strange feeling washed over me. That summer seemed like a lifetime ago, a time when my heart was carefree. Today I found myself looking at Jake not just as my nephew, but as a captivating young man with a future ahead of him. After we settled on a blanket beneath a sprawling oak tree, I watched as Mark began to unpack the picnic basket, his movements full of excitement. Jake and I exchanged glances that spoke volumes. It was a fleeting connection, but in that moment, it felt monumental. I was startled from my thoughts when Jake leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you dream about, Sarah?" His question caught me off guard. I hesitated, my heart racing. "Dreams? You mean like career goals or anything?" he said, his gaze steady. "I just feel like we're all so caught up in life sometimes that we forget to think about what we really want." His sincerity pulled at my heart. "I suppose I dream about adventure," I confessed, feeling a rush of vulnerability. "I've always wanted to travel, see the world beyond these four walls. But work and life got in the way." "Why not do it?" he challenged, his eyes sparkling with youthful idealism. "You're not tied down. You could take a break." "Jake, it's not that simple," I replied, forcing a smile to hide the turmoil within. "I have responsibilities, a career to maintain." "But what about what you want?" he pressed, leaning in even closer. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and my pulse quickened. My voice faltered as I searched for the right words. "I want to feel alive again like I did when I was younger." "Then let's do something crazy this summer," he suggested, his enthusiasm infectious. "Let's make some memories." I laughed softly, but I felt a thrill at his words. "What do you have in mind?" "Skydiving, or maybe a road trip." He grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Just something spontaneous." "Spontaneous, huh? You do realize I'm not exactly the adventurous type anymore?" I raised an eyebrow, though my heart raced at the idea. "Maybe you just need a little push," he teased, his tone light, but I sensed the deeper meaning behind his words. As the afternoon light began to fade, we retreated back to the house. I bid Mark good night and headed to my room, my mind swirling with the day's events. I settled into bed, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thoughts of Jake lingering like a sweet yet dangerous perfume. Just as I was about to drift off, there was a soft knock at my door. My heart leapt as I sat up. "Jake?" I called out, half expecting it to be my imagination. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Ah, sure," I replied, pulling the covers tighter around me. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. I've been having nightmares," he admitted, his eyes wide and sincere. "I thought maybe I could sleep on the floor here, just for tonight." I hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Jake, Please," he interrupted, a hint of desperation in his voice. "I just don't want to be alone right now." Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Okay, but just for tonight." He smiled gratefully and settled down on the floor beside my bed. I lay back, heart racing, as the distance between us seemed to dissolve. There was an electric tension in the air and I could hardly breathe. "Sarah," he whispered after a long silence. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely audible. "I've been thinking." He trailed off, the weight of his words hanging in the air. My heart pounded in my chest. "Thinking about what?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "About us, about how close we've gotten this summer." His voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying intensity. I don't want to pretend anymore. Jake, we can't. I started, but he cut me off. I like you, Sarah, more than a lot, he confessed, his eyes searching mine. I didn't mean for this to happen, but it has. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to push him away, to assert the boundaries that I knew should exist. But there was a part of me that was drawn to him, captivated by the intensity of his words. Jake, we can't do this, I stammered, my heart racing. You're my nephew. Does it matter? He challenged. And for a moment, I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the longing that mirrored my own. I was caught in the web of emotions, struggling to find my way out. As the days turned into a blur of summer sun and heavy emotions, I found myself caught in the intoxicating whirlwind of my own feelings. Each morning I would wake up with a pit in my stomach, a mixture of guilt and excitement gnawing at me. Jake was not just my teenage nephew. He had become a part of my daily thoughts, my secret thrill. I watched him laugh and joke with Mark, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect family life. One evening, after a delicious dinner filled with laughter and stories, Mark excused himself to take care of some work emails. I felt a rush of relief wash over me. Jake and I lingered in the kitchen, the remnants of our meal scattered across the table. I poured us both a glass of wine, trying to convince myself that it was just a casual gesture. But as I handed him the glass, our fingers brushed, sending an electric shock through me. Here's to summer, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, to summer, Jake replied, his gaze lingering on mine longer than it should have. I could feel the tension building, thick and suffocating, and yet exhilarating. As we sipped our wine, we fell into easy conversation, reminiscing about our family trips and the ridiculous things Mark did to make us laugh. The wine loosened my inhibitions, and I found myself leaning closer to Jake, drawn in by his youthful energy and the way he looked at me as if I was the most fascinating person in the room. Remember that time we went to the lake? Jake asked, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. You dared me to jump off the highest dive and I did it, but you were too scared to follow. I laughed, my heart racing. I was not scared. I just preferred to keep my feet on solid ground. Oh, come on. You could have done it. You just didn't want to show off in front of me, he teased, his voice playful yet intense. I felt myself flush at his words, the weight of his gaze making my heart skip a beat. The laughter faded, leaving behind a charged silence. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping loudly in my ears. Suddenly, Jake leaned in closer, and I felt a rush of heat flood through me. You know, Sarah, I really like spending time with you. You're different from the other adults in my life. You actually listen. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jake, Before I could finish my thought, he leaned in even closer, and before I knew what was happening, our lips met in a soft, unexpected kiss. Time stopped. My mind raced. What was I doing? Panic surged within me, and I pulled away, the reality of the moment crashing down around us. Jake, we can't. This isn't right. I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked hurt, confusion clouding his eyes. Why not? I know you feel it too. I can't help how I feel about you. I took a step back, my heart pounding furiously. This isn't just a summer fling. I'm your aunt. You need to understand how complicated this is. Complicated? Or just scary? He shot back, frustration creeping into his voice. I'm not a little kid anymore, Sarah. I know what I want. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. Jake, please. You have to understand that this could ruin everything. My marriage, our family. Maybe everything needs to change, he replied, his voice low and intense. Maybe this is what we both need? His words hung in the air, tempting and dangerous. I could feel the pull between us, the magnetic attraction that had been building since his arrival. But I also felt the crushing weight of my responsibilities, my marriage, and everything I had built with Mark. Jake, I can't, I said firmly, though my heart screamed in protest. We need to stop this now before it goes any further. I turned away, my mind racing with thoughts of guilt and desire, trying to regain my composure. I was caught in a web of emotions that I had never anticipated, and as I glanced back at Jake, I saw the determination in his eyes, a determination that both terrified and thrilled me. In that moment, I knew this was far from over. The lines had been crossed, and there was no turning back. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart racing as guilt and excitement battled within me. The summer breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the distant sounds of children laughing and the faint hum of lawnmowers. Outside, life continued as usual, while I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. I had never imagined I would find myself in a situation like this, torn between my loyalty to Mark and the undeniable attraction I felt for Jake. "Sarah, are you there?" Lisa's voice crackled through the phone, pulling me from my thoughts. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding. "Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. You need to be careful. This isn't just some fling. You're playing with fire," she warned, her tone serious. I know, I sighed, pacing the room. "But it's complicated. Jake he's different. He understands me in a way that Mark doesn't right now." "Different? He's 17, Sarah. You're his aunt. You have a life, a marriage. What are you doing?" Lisa pressed, her concern palpable. "I can't help it, Lisa," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's this thrill when I'm with him. It's like I'm alive again." "Alive? Or just reckless?" she shot back. "Think about Mark. He loves you. What if he finds out?" I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Mark.oh. The thought of hurting him was unbearable, yet the pull I felt towards Jake was magnetic. "I need to figure this out," I said, my voice trembling. "Just promise me you'll think it through. Infidelity doesn't just affect you, it destroys families," Lisa warned before we hung up. I tossed my phone onto the bed, feeling the weight of her words. But the moment I heard Jake's laughter echoing from the living room, I felt a rush of exhilaration. I couldn't deny how vibrant and alive he made me feel. A few days later, I found myself in a situation I had never intended to create. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow through the kitchen windows as I prepared dinner. Jake was supposed to be studying in his room, but I felt a magnetic pull towards him. I walked in, finding him sprawled on the floor, surrounded by textbooks, a hint of frustration on his face. "Hey, you need a break," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm so tired of studying," Jake replied, running a hand through his hair. "Can we just forget about school for a bit?" "Sure. Let's watch something," I suggested, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest. As the evening wore on, we settled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us. I could feel the tension in the air thicken, the space between us charged with something electric. Jake leaned in closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, fresh and intoxicating. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if things were different? If we didn't have this age gap, this family connection?" My breath caught in my throat. "Jake, we can't just think about it," he interrupted, his eyes fierce. "What if we could be free of all that?" I felt my heart race, the thrill of his words igniting something deep within me. "It's not that simple," I whispered, though the temptation was overwhelming. "Why not? We could have something real," he urged, inching even closer. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. The world around us faded away, and in that moment I was lost. The kiss was electric, igniting a fire I had buried deep within. I pulled away, panic flooding my system. "We can't do this, Jake. It's wrong." "But it feels so right," he said, his voice filled with desperation. "I can't help how I feel about you." "I need to think," I managed, rising abruptly from the couch, my heart racing. I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me, the implications of what just happened swirling in my mind. Days passed, and despite my best efforts to resist, I found myself drawn to Jake again and again. Each stolen moment, every secret exchange, heightened the thrill and deepened my internal struggle. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the allure of what we shared was intoxicating. Then one evening, as I sat scrolling through my phone in the living room, I noticed Mark's footsteps approaching. He was coming home early, and I felt a jolt of panic. I quickly locked my phone and turned to greet him with a smile, but I sensed something was off. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. "It was fine," he replied, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "I've been thinking about us. And Jake." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Just that I feel like something's different. I don't know. It's like there's a distance between us." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Had he noticed my secret rendezvous? I could feel the walls closing in around me, the reality of my situation crashing down like waves against a cliff. "Mark, I began, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't confess the truth, not yet. As the evening progressed, I found myself constantly glancing at my phone, waiting for a message from Jake. But my heart was heavy with guilt as I realized that my double life was becoming harder to maintain. Mark's suspicion hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break at any moment. I sat at the edge of our bed, my heart pounding like a war drum. Mark stood in front of me, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. The air between us was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind that felt like it could snap at any moment. He had just confronted me about the text messages he had found between me and Jake, and the dam I had built around my feelings was beginning to crumble. "I can't believe this, Sarah." Mark's voice was a strained whisper, his eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I could give. "How could you let it get this far?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I tried to find the words. "It's not what you think, Mark. I have feelings for Jake, but I swear it hasn't gone further than that." The admission hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Mark's expression shifted, a storm brewing in his eyes. "You expect me to believe that? You're telling me you've developed feelings for your teenage nephew, and it's all innocent?" "It's complicated," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Jake is struggling, and I wanted to help him. I never meant for it to get out of hand." "Complicated or convenient?" he snapped back, the hurt in his tone cutting deeper than I had anticipated. "You're playing with fire, Sarah. You can't just throw away everything we've built over some fantasy." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a mixture of guilt and anger swirling within me. "It's not a fantasy. I care about him, but I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to lose what we have." "Then why are you risking it?" Mark took a step closer, his voice lowering to a desperate plea. "Do you even care about what this will do to us? To your family? To me?" I looked away, unable to bear the pain in his gaze. "I don't know, Mark. I'm confused. I never wanted this to happen." My voice trembled, the weight of my betrayal crashing over me like a tidal wave. Just then, we heard the creak of the floorboards outside our bedroom. I froze, my heart racing as I realized Jake had been standing there, eavesdropping. I turned to see him, his expression unreadable but his body tense, as if he were bracing for impact. "Jake, I started, but he cut me off, stepping into the room with a furious determination that left me breathless. "I heard everything," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "And I can't just stand by and let this happen." Mark's eyes shifted between us, confusion and anger mixing in his expression. "What do you mean, let this happen?" Jake took a deep breath, his gaze piercing through the tension in the room. "I've been feeling something for you, Sarah. It's not just a crush, it's more than that. I thought I could keep it to myself, but I can't. You mean something to me." Calm down. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the ground beneath me shift, the foundations of my carefully constructed life crumbling. Jake's confession hung heavily in the air, a twisted revelation that left all of us reeling. Mark's face paled, and I could see the hurt morphing into something darker. "You've been lying to both of us," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What else are you hiding?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing across his features. "I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I thought I could handle it. But hearing you two argue made me realize how serious everything is." Tension crackled like static electricity, and I felt like I was caught in a storm. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," I whispered, my heart racing as I searched for a way to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. Mark took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, how it was supposed to go? You think this is some sort of game?" "No," I said, panic rising in my chest. "It's not a game. I didn't know how deep my feelings ran until it was too late." The weight of my words settled heavily, and I glanced at Jake, whose eyes mirrored my turmoil. Suddenly, I felt the ground beneath me shatter completely. Mark's expression shifted, and I knew in that moment that he had known something was off for longer than I had realized. "What else are you hiding from me, Sarah?" Mark's voice was cold, determined, and I could see the betrayal etched into his features. I was left staring at my phone, the screen illuminating a message from Jake that could unravel everything further. In that moment I felt utterly lost, caught between my loyalty to Mark and the undeniable pull toward Jake. I knew whatever came next would change everything, and I braced myself for the storm that was about to break.